Hi, thanks for joining me in this video series on an empowerment approach to post-trauma growth. My name is Nancy Forster. I'm the founder, the executive director of the National EFT Training Institute, NEFTI. And in this first video, I'd like to share with you some observations about the evolution of the paradigm around coaching and therapy for trauma. It's a privilege for me to be in a place in my career, in my own evolution, having been around this field for 40 some odd years, to be able to look back and see then all the different phases of the evolution. So I remember a time when I first started as a psychotherapist where we didn't know anything about trauma. That wasn't even a word in our psychotherapeutic vocabulary. There were a lot of words that weren't part of our vocabulary back then. This would have been the mid-90s, where we didn't talk about trauma, we didn't talk about emotion, we didn't talk about body, mind, spirit. That was like beyond. We didn't talk about acceptance and commitment and all of those, but particularly we had no idea about the actual impact of trauma on a human being. That started to evolve just in the late 90s. And the original paradigm was that trauma is a psychological issue. And the implication of that was that only regulated mental health professionals could then deal with trauma. The challenge, of course, being what we didn't know then that we know now is that trauma is ubiquitous. Trauma is not only in every client that we see, but it is in us as the wounded healer. It is an organizing structure of being human. The difficulty when we looked at saw trauma as being a psychological issue is that we saw trauma as being what happened to you, that the trauma was in the event. We would talk about traumatic events. So maybe a physical trauma, you fell out of a tree and got a concussion, or there'd be an emotional trauma where a child maybe got left in a hospital alone when they were 4 years old, when parents weren't allowed to stay with them. So then the natural conclusion that the therapist came to was that in order to serve the client, they needed to take them back to the event, right, to resolve the trauma. The difficulty there was that direction was itself high risk of re-traumatizing the client. And I'll talk about why that is in a little while. So in fact, those well-intentioned efforts of untrained, unskilled therapists could actually make the situation worse, that the clients could actually decompensate from the very approach to try to help them. The second issue being, of course, that we just don't have enough mental health professionals in the world to take care of the implications of trauma that are surrounding us at the moment. And so then in about the year 2000, 2005, this new paradigm began to emerge with the work of Bessel van der Kolk and his book, Your Body Keeps a Score, with the work of Peter Levine, is we began to understand that trauma's not in the event, trauma's in the body. And furthermore, it's not psychological, it's biological. Now, this was a wonderful advance, right? That the response to trauma is embedded in who we are as a human being. We began to talk about the nervous system. We began to talk about fight, flight, freeze, and all of these natural defensive states in response to trauma experiences. And furthermore, this was really the coming into the mainstream of a somatic approach, of sensation in the body. And as I say, this was a wonderful advancement. The challenge that we've seen in recent years is that it's also constrained when we're looking at sensory experience in the body, it can also be premature in that the client may not have the capacity to actually experience that somatic sensation in their body. And in that sense, if that's the only pathway that we're using, the sensory pathway, it also has the potential itself, again, despite the positive intention of the therapist, that approach may itself be re-traumatizing. And so in the most recent years, what we have now is this newest paradigm where we see that trauma is a constriction in the energy flow of the human system. Now, when I say energy flow, I'm really using Dr. Dan Siegel's idea that energy and information are the same thing. Energy flow, information flow in the human system, and that human experience is optimized when there are fewer constrictions in the energy flow of the system. So if you think about a river, a free-flowing river, as opposed to a river that has some rocks in the middle of it, the rocks actually constrain the flow of the water through the river by diverting it in directions which are less efficient than the free flow. So the human energy system is the same way, that we have optimal health, optimal well-being when the energy flow in the body is not constricted. And what trauma does then is to constrict that energy flow and constrain it in certain ways. When I talk about energy flow here, I mean right down to the very mitochondria in the cells, those little energy packs that are in every cell of the body and that are responsible for taking the environment, the nourishment of the environment, whether it's external, like sunshine, meaningful relationships, or internal, like the food and the water that we bring into our bodies, that the mitochondria are responsible for transforming that form of energy into the form of energy that the body can use. When trauma comes along, trauma means that in that moment, the energy system doesn't have the capacity to process all the information of that trauma. There are like 4 billion bits of information that come into the human system at any point in time. And so when an event is happening which is beyond the current capacity of that system to process it, what the system will do is to constrict the energy flow in an effort to create safety in the system. It will constrict the energy flow of that system, which in the short term is a good decision. In the longer term, though, when that system does not have the support it needs to actually process all of that information, then that becomes like a rock in the energy flow of the system and begins to constrict the efficient flow of energy. So trauma then is fragmenting to an energy system, to a human being, right? It fragments the flow of energy in the system. It fragments the client's experience of themselves, about their sense of identity. It fragments their access to their emotions, their access to their biological safety, access to their sensation. It fragments their choices of behavior. It also then at its core, our system is energetic. We have certain amounts of energy available, and we use it in particular ways that are important to us. So when we have experiences which fragment the energy, we have less energy available for the things which are important, things like routine biological maintenance, routine life tasks, available to focus on pleasure and creating relationships and creating experiences of meaning and enjoy. In conscious EFT, we speak about the client's window of joy, their current capacity for creating present day experiences of pleasure, of curiosity, of interest, and of joy. All of that takes energy. And when the biological system has been constrained by these experiences which fragment off the energy, the client has less energy available for creating these meaningful healing experiences and for growth and the creation of the life that they would really prefer to have. So what we do, rather than going to bring the client to focus on the event, rather our focus is on growing the client's capacity to process information today, to grow their window of joy, their capacity for joy today, knowing that the wisdom of the body and how it was created, that as we increase that capacity in ways which are safe and pleasurable for the system today, that capacity to process information increases, and the body's wisdom itself is then able to process information from the past that it previously didn't have the capacity to do. So this is an empowerment approach to post-trauma growth. And in the next video of the series, we'll have a look at what that actually means, how we then actually approach the professional work in transformational coaching and therapy. Thanks for tuning in, and I really look forward to our next conversation.